Hello, it's Sunday, and it's raining lightly, and it's in the 30s. It's not windy, it's overcast, and we're getting closer and closer to the bare bones of the trees, which even in their hibernation are gorgeous to look at. The Roe v. Wade's anniversary, which will not be because of Justice Alito, is the talk of the day, as it should be. And the thing about it is it takes me back to when I was trying to figure out what the law was about. One of the books I read was by Justice Black. And he was explaining the crisis at that time, how there were forces in America that wanted to push back against the Supreme Court making decisions based on the supremacy clause that federal law is supreme to all of the law, including states, and the Bill of Rights, if you will, and the amendments as incorporated into the Constitution after the Civil War and the 14th Amendment. So there's a very strong move to assert and protect and defend against civil rights and liberties in the 60s, including what came out of that period, Roe v. Wade. And so there was a push, among others, and the code was there should be judicial forbearance. In other words, the court should just resort to its original jurisdiction and shouldn't take up these things like, Roe v. Wade, for example. But our Constitution in the Fourth Amendment certainly guaranteed some privacy, and the Fifth talked about taking things away only in a certain way, which was considered due process, which basically means fundamental fairness. So there was this controversy then about judicial forbearance, which didn't get legs until years later. So there were these rights guaranteed in a variety of circumstances, including Roe v. Wade, ultimately. So there's been a war since for those who do not want to be bound by laws, provisions, interpretations, cases like Roe v. Wade, which guarantee a right to another individual. Now, in the case of Roe v. Wade, we're talking about the right of a woman to determine her body, what to do with it, and how it may be done. And that's been the law of the land for almost 50 years until Judge Alito. So what we're celebrating today is a past decision about how we treat our own that's been overridden by political hacks put on the court to do just that. The instruction for this upheaval is, in my opinion, a religious belief that has no basis in science. That is, that you're a person on the moment of conception, when you have a fecundated ovum, and that's not acceptable. And the state then should determine who and what can have a baby and when, I wonder if men were limited to 2 children and then had to tie their tubes, if that would change how the law is. It's not a bad idea. Really, it isn't. It might focus one to be more careful. And/or men and women both should be able to recognize that they have dominion over their own body and its function and so forth. But that's not exactly where we are. We have a movement in this country in which they would kill you to stop you from having an abortion. Inconsistencies do not bother these people. As a somewhat public figure, when I've run for office, people have confronted me with pictures of, fetuses and so forth. Well, life is a messy business, but these fetuses could not have gone to term in some cases. In other cases, in the first several months, women do what the right of choice allows them to do. And when you consider, and I know this from my own family, because my 2 aunts were always working at the Foundling for all these children that weren't wanted and didn't have a place to stay. All the criminal cases I've considered over the years on either side of the question often goes back to being unwanted children, to being in a situation in which two young kids had a child and had no idea how to run their own lives, much less the child's. But I don't think any of those are legitimate questions for a woman who's pregnant, doing what she must do to preserve her integrity and what she must do for herself. And so that's basically my view of the argument. I really resent what's happening to America in the sense of everybody's, oh, God bless this and God bless that, and that's fine on a personal level. It has no business in our public government. It has no business in our statutes, in our decisions in the court. But it's used as a device because so many people have religion. You say, oh yeah, well, Jesus never said you couldn't have an abortion. Jesus was accepting of all sorts of things. And we have to go to the Old Testament to find the sin of Onan and things like that. One might argue today that one could not pleasure oneself and spill the seed upon the earth. So then that means you could never have intimate relations unless you were going to have a child, which you could never guarantee anyhow, because people, work in a way to have children, and some can and some don't. So we're in a special place, and I think it's important that Americans are in a different place than the minority who are pushing for this diminution of the autonomy of a woman. And there's no better day perhaps to be talking about these things than on the anniversary of Roe v. Wade. There's a couple of things. I get upset about the talking heads on Sunday. I heard a Republican, I believe he was a senator because I just heard him talking, and he said that Biden, he was now subject to a search warrant just like Trump. Now the host was smart enough to say no, there was no search warrant. Now, there is a difference in my mind between complying and cooperating and evading and obstructing, the latter being what Trump does and the former what Biden is doing. And I've heard a couple of senators today basically say that they should let the cards fall where they may, meaning that if Biden violated the law, then should be treated as violating the law. And if Trump did, likewise, and particularly more aggressively, if he did more, indeed obstructed the investigation. Otherwise, this notion of, no man is above the law. I mean, we've been suffering with this bullshit for years now, and this is only the most recent example of that. And we can't have Biden going around saying there's no there when we find documents. What we need is a simple chronological discussion of what happened. And the lawyers are probably telling him don't do that, and he's doing this at a cost. It may cost him and us a presidential election if he were to run, given this baggage. Now, it's not yet overwhelming, but it is pushing him into the earth. It's compromising his degrees of freedom as a candidate. It's making him out to be a hypocrite. He's got to end it. He has to end it. And those people who say, I'll wait and see what the prosecutor says, I don't trust the prosecutor. I think they sweet-talk them into having an unofficial search of their house. Okay, it's a good decision to do it, but doesn't anybody look in these places beforehand so they can produce it? How did his team overlook this? It's bizarre. And to have a prosecutor who, in my opinion, is compromised because of the Mueller investigation and his role with Maine justice, he's not the guy I would trust to be as fair as possible, at the risk of embarrassing him if he ever hears this. Bob Fisk, who was one U.S. attorney I served with, he's like a Roman senator. He had the principles that are just astonishing. His background's entirely Republican. His appointment was Republican. But he's a man that you could trust to do what the facts and the law dictate. Not so this guy that we're dealing with who's investigating Biden. So Those are a couple of things. Now, in another category, there's this notion that I saw one of the White House people saying what Klain did as chief of staff for Biden, that was comparable to what LBJ did. Is he kidding? Now, there are substantial accomplishments, but LBJ, because of his own skill, because of the assassination of JFK, because of cooperation between the parties in those days, he had the war on poverty. He had the Clean Air Act. He had the Civil Rights Act. He extended and supplemented Medicare and Medicaid. I mean, what planet are these people in? Not to mention the Voters' Rights Act. So, you know, Klain is skilled and capable, but we have to be careful about what we say. Now, for me, I celebrate all those things LBJ did, but I would have nothing to do with him because I thought he was killing people my age. I thought they were lying to us, and it turns out they were. And so I could never forgive LBJ for what he did involving foreign affairs. And Biden, in that score, has much less, if anything, to explain about his foreign policy decisions, some of which were made before him that he only enacted. And finally, in the thoughts and prayers category, tell me, Christians, why don't we just go and stop this gun thing? I have seen women in nearby Fairfax with holsters in the form of a cross and a gun in them, open carrying. That's not what responsible citizenship is. And so now we have 10 people killed out in California, and what are we going to do? Oh, we're going to clench our rosary beads and be upset and do not a damn thing about it. So, those are a few of my thoughts about how we move the Republic forward. And we move it forward with a lot more honesty. Let's take a risk on telling the truth, huh? Let's try. If we make a mistake, let's admit it. Let's get on with it. Let's have this Congress actually do something. How about a timeout from politics in which we actually govern? We stop playing games with the debt, voters' rights, equality, certainly Roe v. Wade, all of these things. But it's up to us. We have to push them. I have one thought about Tim Kaine, whom I've always admired. I've known him, as have many in Virginia, and talked to him a lot and been with him from time to time on some of his projects. He ran as vice president with Hillary Clinton, and he's going to run again for the U.S. Senate. And I wouldn't choose to tell someone else what to do with their political skill or what respect they have among the voters. And he's talking about running for the Senate again, and I'm glad to hear that. But I'd like him to spend a day or two thinking about running for president. This is not right now to say run for president, but it's to think about it. Because if Biden messes this up, we're going to have to get a candidate, whether it's Kamala Harris or, our senator from Virginia or the governor of California. We're going to have to do something about that. So we should be thinking about it. I assume some are. So here we are in the rain in my cathedral of trees, somewhat wet, and I'll talk to you tomorrow. Bye-bye.